Brilliant. Looks like we will get started now. Thank you everyone for joining this morning's webinar on online targeting of age-restricted ads. Some of you who have attended our training before may recognize me, but my name's Ramni. I work in the communications team at the ASA and I look after all of the training events that we host. Today, I'm joined by my two colleagues, Shahriar and Conor, who will be leading on today's session. But before I hand over to them, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping bits, give you some information about how the session will work, and just provide a brief introduction as well. So we've actually had over 270 registrations for today's event, which is a really amazing turnout and a very clear indication of our stakeholders' interest in this area. Marketers and agencies make up the biggest share of today's audience. This webinar is principally directed at you, and as always, we really appreciate your commitment to training and advice on the advertising rules. We're also joined by industry representative groups, and likewise, we welcome the work you do to amplify the messages you hear at this and other events we run, and for helping to promote the highest standards in UK advertising. And we're also joined by colleagues in government and other regulatory bodies, which we're pleased about because we strive to ensure consistency in messaging to all of our stakeholders, so we're all on the same page. Obviously, some of you may not fit into any of those groups, and we welcome you as well to today's webinar on online targeting of age-restricted ads. So the way the session will work, we've got about an hour, and we will have time for a Q&A at the end. So the way the Q&A will work is if you have any questions whilst Conor or Shahriar are speaking, I recommend popping them into the Q&A box along the top. We will field those questions as they come in and we'll do our very best to answer as many as we can at the end. Today's session is being recorded, so you will get access to the recording afterwards, and you'll also get a copy of the slides as well. And the recording, you'll be able to share that with colleagues as well who may not have been able to attend today's session. Apart from that, I think that's pretty much about it in terms of housekeeping. However, like I said, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get around to answering those. I'm now going to hand over to Shahriar, who is going to start things off today.
Thanks, Ramneet, and good morning, everyone. And thanks again for attending in such large numbers. As Ramneet says, we think stakeholder engagements are really an important measure of an effective regulatory system. And it's excellent to see so many of you engaged on this and other issues falling under the ASA's remits. So I'm Shahriar and I'm director here at the ASA and the Committees of Advertising Practice. Ramneet, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to begin this webinar by speaking very briefly about the current UK context around alcohol, gambling, and food and soft drinks high in fat, salt, or sugar, which we refer to as HFSS products. All of these products play into issues of public health, whether physical and/or mental health. So it shouldn't surprise any of us that government, whose first duty is to protect public health, should take a policy interest in them. Of relevance to our world, that includes how these products are marketed and to whom. For example, to further address the issue of childhood obesity, the UK government has decided to introduce in 2023 a 9 PM ban on HFSS ads on TV and video on demand services and a ban online. This will come with exceptions for brand advertising and for SME manufacturers. On this point, we know that the food and drink industry is impatient for guidance on these restrictions, and I can assure you that we're making every effort with Ofcom and government departments to deliver the clarity you need. The government is also undertaking a review of the Gambling Act 2005 to ensure that the Act is fit for the digital age. We expect proposals to update the legislation to be announced in the first half of 2022, and we'll see to what extent the proposals challenge the current restrictions on gambling advertising in Great Britain, which are primarily overseen by the ASA system. And on the alcohol front, the Scottish Government is promising to consult on further restrictions to alcohol marketing in Scotland. It's citing World Health Organization guidelines and the views of the Young Scot organisation as an impetus for this. Its focus appears to be on outdoor, online and cinema advertising and seeking from the UK government a 9 p.m. ban on TV alcohol ads. So, as you can see, there remains a public policy spotlight on the marketing of these products, and one that has special regard to the protection of children and young people. We share the same concerns for that group, which we reflect in part through rules and guidance to ensure under 18's exposure to age-restricted ads is appropriately limited, including in the online environment. As advertisers, it's your responsibility and the agencies you engage to fully understand the rules and to robustly apply them. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, you do just that, helping to ensure that ads remain legal, decent, honest and truthful, and the UK can continue to boast the highest standards in advertising. But in some cases, the ASA's proactive monitoring work has identified instances where insufficient care has been taken and the rules have been breached. These cases are both regrettable and, importantly, they are easily avoidable. So to provide you with an insight into these cases and the compliance lessons that come from them, I'm now going to hand across to my colleague, Conor Gibson. Over to you, Conor.
Thanks, Shahriar. Just by way of a brief introduction, I'm Conor Gibson. I'm currently working as a regulatory policy executive at CAP, but I have had varying degrees of involvement in all the projects that I'm going to talk about that took place over the last 18 months. If we go on to the next slide, please, Rooney. I'm going to take you through quickly what the rules are and then talk about the monitoring projects that we've conducted to enforce the rules and inform our guidance. And then I'm going to go through some key principles of responsible advertising of age-restricted products. On this slide, you'll see that the CAP code has specific rules that relate to age-restricted products that are intended to minimise harm to children in terms of the content which they contain. So they shouldn't contain any content that encourages excessive consumption, condones irresponsible behaviour, or has characters that appeal to children. The rules are fairly clear, but the application can be tricky along the borderlines. And so if you are advertising a product that's age restricted and you're concerned that some of the content may appeal to children, then you can use the free copy advice service through CAP, and they can give you some dedicated guidance on that. So the next slide, please. There are also sector-specific rules relating to media choice and targeting, and essentially those state that ads for age-restricted products should not appear in media that is commissioned for or aimed at children, or where children represent more than 25% of the audience. As you'll see on the next slide, these are the actual sort of in situ rules for the products as they appear within the codes. Sorry to click through there. So we cover HFSS, gambling, lotteries, and alcohol. There are also corresponding rules in the BCAP code relating to broadcast, but we won't be covering that in today's session. So next slide, please. Why is it important to exclude child audiences? Well, obviously it minimises harmful exposures to ads for age-restricted products, but also it supports effective campaigns. There's no point in running an ad campaign that serves ads to people who are actually unable to engage with your products. So under 18s, it's just not a sensible way of doing things. But to achieve that, there's a few things that you should consider. There's issues with how declared and inferred age data is used on websites and by platforms. Neither of them are perfect. Children may register with a false age in order to get access to a platform that has a minimum age requirement, or the algorithms or the databases for inferred age data is not going to be 100% accurate, so there will always be gaps within that. There's also significant variations within the different online environments. Non-logged in open access environments are going to rely more on inferred age information, and they're less likely to have access to declared age or even verified age data, whereas the walled gardens of social media platforms are going to have access to sort of higher quality and more detailed demographic data on the individual user who's using it at the time. It's important that you, as advertisers, engage with your tech partners to understand what type of data they're using to determine the ages of users whenever they're running the campaigns. And just the final point there, that additional caution is advised if you're going to advertise in spaces that are popular with both adults and children. Talk about it later in terms of mixed age media. So a lot of subject areas, culture, sport, things like that will have interest to both older children and younger adults. And so those are spaces where you need to have extra caution whenever you're running your ads online. But if you were, for example, running your ads on the Saga website, which is, mostly over 60s using that, then you don't need to be quite as cautious as you would be in shared online spaces. Next slide, please. So this is some information about the first of the three projects I'm going to tell you about. We refer to this as CCTV monitoring. Essentially, it was keeping an eye on what was happening in online spaces, taking advantage of monitoring databases that were already available through Nielsen to look into ads being served in online spaces where they should never appear. So these are websites that actually appeal to or are commissioned for children. We looked at 49 websites and 12 YouTube channels in a 12-month period. And in that time, we identified 101 advertisers serving ads for restricted products. That also included, for this project only, e-cigarettes and weight loss products, which are also subject to age restrictions. Whenever we identified these issues during the 12-month process, we also engaged with the advertisers, who then amended their approaches accordingly, which meant that there was minimal recidivism throughout the period. And if we just go through to the next slide, you'll see the final statistics that will have been or should be published on the NSA website today. And they just show the areas where we found some issues. The next slide lets us know about the second project I'm going to talk about, which was using avatars, which are kind of dummy profiles that mimic specific age groups online, not their behavior, but their profiles. And we were looking on what I previously mentioned, the mixed age media, so online spaces popular with children and adults, and where ads for age restricted products should be served with caution. Essentially, what we would like to see is that if there are adult users and child users on this website and there are ads for age restricted products, that the advertisers should be using the targeting mechanisms available to them to deliver the majority of ads to the adult users and fewer ads to the child users. Unfortunately, that was not what we found in the data, but we were able to, by identifying some of the issues, engage with the advertisers, get a better understanding of the tools that they used, and see if there were any gaps in the understanding or provision of these tools. The issues were not isolated to specific non-logged in online spaces. We found issues on YouTube and on websites, so they would have been delivered by a range of ad technologies, and there were advertisers who believed that their campaigns have been set to only target, say, over 25s, or to exclude users who were in an unknown age category, and yet our data found that their ads were being served to them. There were instances of gambling advertisers who had used retargeting techniques to serve ads to known previous customers, and our avatars were receiving their ads despite not matching the behaviors or profiles of known previous customers. Then on to the next slide, it's just some brief promotional material explaining what the avatars were and our interest in mixed age media, but that's all tied in to the release of the report, which came out in late July. So if you want to read that, that's all available on the NSA website. And then the next slide, I'll talk about the final project, which was probably the most complex monitoring project we've conducted so far. It's our understanding that this was a world first of a self-regulatory body with no formal powers to compel organizations to provide data to us, where we were actually successful in making a landmark data request to 5 major social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Snap. And they provided us with 2 months worth of data on paid alcohol campaigns on their platforms. It was fully anonymized, so we didn't analyze any of the content, because that would have revealed the identities of the advertisers. But we did analyze the approaches that they'd used and the targeting mechanisms to identify if they were using everything available to them and following a best practice approach. And what we essentially found was that there was evidence of risk within the behavior of several of the advertisers that we were finding. There was no evidence of real children seeing these ads, but the way that the campaigns have been set up could potentially have led to exposure to children to these alcohol ads. One of the most significant aspects was how much the provisions of these tools vary from platform to platform, and then how they were applied by the advertisers. We weren't able to always specifically say this was advertiser A's 20 ads and this was 10 ads from advertiser B, but we did find that there were some advertisers who were taking much stricter precautions than others, and some that were actually being suboptimal, I suppose is the best way to put it. All the platforms that we engaged with had provisions for age-based exclusionary targeting. You can say only target 18 plus, only target 25 plus, things like that. But there were significant variations in how exclusionary interest-based targeting was provided. In an ideal scenario, if you're targeting a younger age segment, you might want to exclude people who are interested in subjects or topics that are particularly of interest to under 18s. But that wasn't always a viable option within the platforms at the time. It is worth pointing out that this was conducted the data comes from early 2020. As we'll discuss later, we look at principles-based guidance because the environment changes so quickly within platforms and across platforms. So we are aware, and from our engagement with the platforms, that they have amended their provisions, and we know that there are major social media platforms are going to be introducing subsequent changes in 2022 about the sort of tools that you can use to target individuals. So there isn't a kind of single conclusive answer for this is how you do it on platform A and this is how you do it on platform B. That said, we do think that it's worth looking into social media for alcohol in particular, because it's often a route used by smaller operators who might be less familiar with the rules or might be less aware of the tools that are available to them. And venues that sell alcohol will often use social media advertising to promote their products and services. And so it's very important that those sorts of ads aren't getting served to children and also late teenagers who are in a sort of in-between status. We'll just move on to the next slide. There's some of the also the promotional material. So this report was published just over a month ago in late October. It's certainly worth reading. There's a lot of detail and interesting insights in there, and you can find that on the SA website. And then on the next slide, we'll see just some of the principles-based advice on effective targeting, primarily in these sort of walled garden social media platform environments. And it's essentially a hierarchy taking you from, the first step to the most thorough steps, but we'll go into that in more detail later on. So the next slide is just going to cover what the key themes that we got from this 18 months worth of work on these projects. So there are problems persisting with serving of age-restricted ads online, and many of these can actually be addressed in quite simple manners. There's the evidence of risk in alcohol ads and social media, which I covered extensively talking about that project. that would also be relevant to other age-restricted products and will become relevant to, for example, cosmetic interventions, as we've recently introduced age restrictions in that category as well. There's definite room for improvement, but we don't think that there's a sign that the current tools are wholly unsuitable. There's plenty of brands who are using them effectively and who haven't been identified in a range of sweeps to find problems in their approaches. There's a number of factors that could feed into that, but certainly it's encouraging that we're not seeing some of the largest gambling and alcohol brands popping up in our monitoring sweeps. And it isn't an area where we've had indicative complaints that indicate, you know, real world exposure of children. We do get complaints about the topics, but not in a manner that indicates that it's a widespread issue. And generally, we would be of the opinion that it shows that the self-regulatory system remains effective in identifying, addressing issues such as this in a changing online ad marketplace. We worked with the platforms, other key stakeholders to make sure that we had effective monitoring approaches and realistic expectations. As I mentioned before, we believe that we're the first organization of our like to use the data request approach, and we're certainly amongst the first to use some of the avatar technology, which this was actually the second such project we conducted. And we are starting to look into using more sophisticated monitoring approaches to identify more complex issues, which could even involve real world ad exposures to children. And it is worth saying that, yes, although we think the system does work, we every time we've looked for a problem, we found a problem. So we would advise advertisers of age-restricted products, which is a key topic of regulatory concern, as Shahriar mentioned previously, to be aware of changes in the sector and the platforms, and make sure that you can respond to that appropriately. So in the next slide, we'll see this is how you might actually do it. These are the key principles for effective targeting of age-restricted products. I'm going to go through each one in turn on subsequent slides, so I'll not read them all now, but essentially by focusing on principles, it allows us to give you guidance that is not platform specific and that you can consider across media, because most brands, to our knowledge, don't run their campaigns exclusively on a single platform. They run them across different social media platforms and across different ad tech providers. And so essentially this is about helping advertisers and agencies kind of act as informed consumers to make sure that they know what they should be doing and what they should expect in terms of an effective campaign. But it is worth pointing out, and I'll discuss very briefly towards the end, that ultimate responsibility for this falls with the brands themselves, with the advertisers. So it is really important that they factor this into the discussions they're having with organizations they're engaging to deliver this sort of work. Next slide, please, Ruth. So the first step, this should be very obvious to everyone, but unfortunately we still see this happening in our monitoring. So we would advise that you avoid all media commissioned for children or where children represent more than 25% of the audience. Even if you're, for example, using interest-based targeting and saying, I only want to run ads for people who are 40 plus, if a 40-year-old user is looking at this homework site, there's a very strong chance that they're looking at it with their child, and then the child will see the gambling or alcohol ad that runs alongside it. This is a fairly uncontroversial topic. I don't think there are many people lobbying for the right to run targeted ads for age-restricted products on children's princess dress-up sites. It's just really, you can't let this one slip. It's one that you should remember and bear in mind as the key first step, and maybe make it a part of your arrangements with ad tech partners, whether that's establishing safe lists and block lists of appropriate media, and using established mechanisms for audience measurement to understand the instances where it goes over that 25% rule. Next slide. This is just an outline of the methodology used in the CCTV monitoring report. It's all available through that link, and will be connected to the promotion of the release that comes out today as well. Essentially, yes, the prime consideration is this content intended for children? And then there are subsequent considerations as to, is this content where the audience is more than 25% under 18s? And alongside that is the specific guidance on media placement restrictions, which is certainly worth checking out. That guidance was published in 2017, but is still very relevant now because it is principles based, because it is not giving you a rundown of what to do on this platform, what to do on that platform. It's explaining how to effectively choose media across a range of sectors. Next slide, please.
Could I just jump in there, Conor? Sorry, Romney, could we just go back one slide? So that link there, which you'll have time to consider when we publish this webinar, links what you can see there, the start of a list of 60 online sites, the vast majority being websites, some of them being YouTube channels as well. There then is a ready-made list, a ready-made block list that you should really consider using for your online targeting. None of your age-restricted ads should be appearing in these sites. Work with your agencies to ensure that these are block listed and your ads don't appear in them. Okay, thanks, Ramnit.
Thanks, Shahriar. That was a point we discussed yesterday and I forgot about. But, so the next piece of guidance would be to utilize age-based targeting in concert with other tools. So whether that's interest-based targeting and looking for example, to pick interests that are much more likely to sit with an older age group, which, garden furnishings or life insurance, but also that there may be mechanisms available to include supplementary data, whether that's first-party data on individual, on previous customers, or data from other sources that's more reliably verified as relating to adults. Then that can help support. But just using age-based targeting alone will often not be appropriate, particularly whenever you're looking at borderline audiences, the kind of 18 to 25 category. Next, please. And this is another key consideration, is that you should, where possible, attempt to use a combination of interests to avoid serving the ads to falsely declared or falsely inferred over 18s. There's going to be areas where there's room for error or conscious misinformation in the information that users have provided, but by including a combination of interests from broad and narrow categories, you should be able to exclude those who are inaccurately listed as over 18, sorry. As for example, if you were running a campaign targeted at people who are interested in football, then there's a risk that within that there will be chunks of falsely declared or falsely inferred over 18s. So you may want to combine that with a kind of consciously adult interest in homewares or such like. On the next slide, there's a few summary examples of some of the approaches that were taken in the alcohol social media monitoring we looked at. On the left-hand side is kind of top best practice approaches of using a higher age targeting and also primarily adult interests like horse racing or cruises or what have you. Then on the right-hand side were some approaches that we saw, not necessarily all in the same place, but of failing to use age guidance or targeting a borderline age group and picking broad interests that will be of similar levels of appeal to young adults and older children, like football and superheroes and things like that. This is also another area where we have specific guidance. I'm not sure if it's on this slide or the next, but the age-restricted ads online guidance, which was published in January 2021, has specific guidance on this issue, and in particular, whenever you're targeting borderline age groups, the 18 to 25 category in particular. We are aware that the gambling industry has a commitment to only target 25 plus, which is, it's great. That's a voluntary commitment that they've made. It is acceptable for HFSS, for alcohol, for other such products, to advertise to 18 to 25-year-olds. It's just that they should take extra caution to make sure that they're not unnecessarily running their ads to under 18s. Next slide, please. So on this one, which will come up in a second, you can read it. We advise that you audit your campaigns to ensure that the approaches that you've taken have been successful. We're well aware that kind of live mid-campaign monitoring might not be practical or might not be financially viable for certain campaigns and for a number of advertisers. But if you are running ads for age-restricted products, we would recommend post-campaign monitoring in order to identify if there's any risk in the strategy that you've taken, whether that's the media in which it's been served or the demographics of the people who've received the ad. And then that will help you improve your future campaigns by making tweaks or by adding some questionable sites to your block list. Advertisers who behave in this manner it will reflect well upon them should there be an ASA investigation. If we find that there's an actual instance of a child seeing an ad for your age-restricted product, and then during the process we find out that you were aware of this and you've already taken steps to address the issue, then it's much more likely that that will be resolved in an informal manner because you're behaving appropriately in response to the issue. Next slide. So yeah, the final point is just to be very cautious if you're using tech partners who can't offer appropriate verification data. I mean, ideally you would not use speculative kind of prospecting approaches for age-restricted products unless you knew that you were focusing on very adult-centric markets, because there is a risk that you'll the new market that hasn't been properly scoped and contains significant proportions of under 18s or media that appeals to children. And a lot of that is just because the risk or the harm of a inappropriately served ad for a gambling product is higher than if it was, say, for car insurance. Nobody's really there's no real harm in a 12-year-old seeing a car insurance ad that they're not eligible for. It's just a waste of money by the advertiser, really. This is again something to think about during the commissioning process with tech partners. If somebody is making very optimistic promises about targeting that don't match up with what the rest of the market's offering, then maybe you want to interrogate that and consider whether they can genuinely confirm that they're able to offer that level of targeting. Next slide, please. So just to sort of wrap this up from me, I'm going to talk about what happens if you do make a mistake, get it wrong, or don't run your campaigns effectively. The ASA's enforcement work is conducted by the CAP compliance team, and we work with regulatory partners and the online platforms themselves. The biggest initial consequence will be negative publicity. Whether we publish monitoring results or the outcomes of formal investigations, often it will be not so much that the code has been breached, it's that the advertiser has failed to engage with or address the issue that will then exacerbate the negative publicity. So again, if there is a problem and you address the problem, then that's going to reflect a lot better than if there's a problem and you double down or fail to agree to changes to your approach. We can also we've also looked at new approaches to how we publicize breaches. Recently, we launched a non-compliant influencers section on our website, which is raising consumer awareness of some reasonably significant influencers who are not appropriately labeling their ad content, and that's obviously not great publicity for them. They've reached the stage where they're being named and shamed, as it were. We can obviously also escalate it to the platforms themselves, and who can take action regarding advertisers' accounts and campaigns, and our co-regulators, which in these areas, the biggest one would be the Gambling Commission, who we will often share intelligence with and work alongside. And there may be provisions in new HFSS regulations to then work with Ofcom for some enforcement elements as well. And further down the line, if we exhaust all of our self-regulatory tools, then we can potentially refer advertisers to statutory bodies for legal interventions. It's worth being aware that we'll consider the wider context of an advertiser's compliance record. So it's unlikely that there would be a referral to trading standards simply for inappropriate targeting of ads. But if an advertiser has a range of problems over a limited time period, which includes failing to engage and failing to act in good faith on issues of targeting, then we would bring that into consideration whenever looking at possible escalation of sanctions. And then just onto the final slide for me, there's a few examples here of the potential negative publicity of problem age-restricted ad serving. It's worth pointing out as well that these are industry publications that I've listed there, so it's showing that it's making it obvious to your peers that there were some issues in how you've set up the campaigns. There's broader reputational damage to the public as well. But yes, essentially that's all the areas that I'm covering. So I'm going to hand over to Shahriar, who's going to have a quick chat about what lies ahead, and then we'll have the Q&A.
Thanks, Conor. And Romney, can we move on to the next slide, please? So I started the webinar with a reflection on the current context, and now I'm going to end with the same thoughts on the future context. We know that the future is going to require age-restricted ads to comply with a mix of rules derived through law and through ASA system regulatory processes. We can assure you that the CAP code, which is the rule book for non-broadcast advertising, will continue to do an excellent job of bringing those rules together in one place, making your lives easier and delivering better regulatory outcomes. The online safety bill and perhaps the government's forthcoming online advertising programme signal a future where greater responsibilities will fall on online service providers to protect their users, including from advertising that harms, offends or misleads its audience. This certainly won't absolve advertisers of the responsibility to target their ads responsibly, but government thinking and potentially even the ASA system itself may evolve to hold platforms and other advertising intermediaries to account for the role that they can play in protecting online users. And finally, Conor's shared with you today the steps that you can take before publication of your ad and after the ad has been published to rubber stamp compliance with our rules. At the Committees of Advertising Practice, we think it's reasonable to explore in 2022 to what extent those pre and post compliance steps may themselves become mandatory to help minimise under-18s exposure to age-restricted ads online. So look out for possible developments on that front. And with that, I'll hand back to Ramneet.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shahriar and Conor. So we're going to take some time now just to cover any questions people might have. I've seen a few have come in as Conor has been presenting. A couple of questions about whether the session is recorded. It is going to be recorded. It will be shared with you afterwards, and you're free to share that recording with colleagues as well. Another question we've had come in, someone has asked, when is the new Appeal to Children guidance coming out?
Now, I'm going to assume that that question relates to gambling advertising and CAP and BCAP's consultation to restrict gambling ads from appealing strongly to under 18s. We have not yet delivered a regulatory statement on that consultation, but we are looking to do that hopefully in the next few weeks, so probably after Christmas, but the guidance will come out there and will set out in quite detailed terms the ways in which gambling advertisers can avoid their ads from appealing strongly to an under 18 audience.
Great, thank you, Shahriar. Someone else has asked, could we get a list of the URLs to restrict our ads from appearing on these sites? So I assume that was the list that was on those slides, and I will share as many links, so all the links that we have discussed, all the pieces of guidance that are on the website, I will compile all of those in a follow-up email so that you have access to all that. You don't have to go find them yourselves. Yeah, I've had a few questions about that. That's fine. Yeah, like I said, we'll share all of that with you. Someone else has asked, do we know when the CAP rulebook will be coming out?
Yes, the CAP rulebook came out 60 years ago. So it's a 60-year-old code. It's a non-broadcast advertising code. So apologies if anything we said in our communication suggested that a new rulebook was coming out. I was referring to the UK Advertising Code, which we refer to as the CAP code, and it's been in existence for 60 years. And as Conor said at the outset of his presentation, it includes rules on content restrictions and media placement restrictions for products such as alcohol, gambling, HFSS, and other product sectors.
Brilliant, thank you, Shahriar. Someone's asked a question about the HFSS 9 p.m. ban. Is this only relating to advertising to under 18s only?
So the 9 p.m. ban refers specifically to government's intended ban on TV and video on demand services regulated by Ofcom. And no, that is a ban, well, obviously that's a ban to seeing any ads before 9 p.m, unless of course you meet the exemptions for brand advertising or you're a food and soft drink manufacturer that employs less than 250 people. I know you're awaiting guidance on that, and a combination of government, Ofcom and ourselves will be providing that guidance at our soonest opportunity. Thereafter, any HFSS advertising that is allowed on TV will still be subject to the under 16 restriction, which means that you cannot show those ads adjacent to programs of particular appeal to under 16s.
Brilliant. Another question here, are advertisers always liable even where the publisher or media owner has got the targeting wrong?
Well, I'll take that one. Essentially, that's where the ultimate responsibility lies within the ASA's rules. But if we were to, for example, conduct an investigation and the advertiser was to show that they'd, believed that they were acting in best practice and their tech provider had failed to meet that, that may be information that's included in the ultimate published ruling. So, there's room for response from the advertiser in all our published formal rulings, and you could set that out. But within the provisions of the CAP code, it would be the advertiser who had been at fault for commissioning a an inappropriate media partner, rather than us moving responsibility to the media partner itself.
Rumnita, I'm going to step in as well and just say that that question is the question of our times, really. And I did touch on it, that both the online safety bill and the online advertising programme will consider to what extent it is appropriate to apply greater accountability to online intermediaries, including their responsibility for appropriate targeting and placement of ads as well. There is provision in the CAP code for the ASA to identify other intermediaries involved with the process. And so it is possible for the ASA, where it believes that actually a platform or other intermediary has been responsible for a harmful advertising outcome, for the ASA to name that in a formal ruling. The CAP code itself doesn't entirely absolve other parties from responsibility in this area.
Brilliant. Great, thank you, Shahriar and Conor. Does anybody else have any other questions? Feel free to pop them into the Q&A box if you do.
Rumnita, I saw an earlier question, which was it's a testing question and a good one. So it was a question that,
yeah, I can see it now. Sorry, yeah, I'll go through that one. So someone has said the ASA Avatar report said that gambling ads were served in broadly similar numbers to child and adult avatars, with no significant skew towards the adult profiles. This is in line with recent research by the University of Bristol, where 45% of children said they saw gambling adverts on social media at least once during the past week. This suggests that current measures and regulations are not working at all in protecting children based on our own evaluation and data. Do we agree that drastic changes are needed, and are we working on such drastic changes?
I would certainly agree. It's a great question. I'm not sure I'd agree necessarily with all of the outcome, and it's great to see someone so engaged in this particular topic area, which is an evolving area of regulation. So just to be absolutely clear, the rules prohibit the placement of gambling, alcohol, etc. ads within children's online environments. But there's always been a kind of acceptance, a regulatory acceptance, both from the ASA and legacy regulators, that these ads should be allowed in predominantly adult audiences. We don't see the evidence that an alcohol ad or a gambling ad per se leads to harm. We haven't seen that evidence, but we do think it is appropriate to restrict the appeal of those ads to children in those environments where they can see them. So what the questioner is talking about is the placement of ads in predominantly adult audience, so where a minimum number of that audience is so 75% at least of that audience are adults. And what we require is for advertisers to try to select their targeting approaches to make sure that if they're placing ads in those legitimate environments, they're skewing them towards an adult audience and away from a child's audience. And as the questioner points out, both the Bristol research and our own research suggests that that could be happening much more effectively than it is. It's part of measures like this where we bring these findings to the industry's attention and demand greater compliance with it. We will be doing follow-up surveys. It's the nature of the ASA to continually monitor compliance with its rules. And if we don't see a response to that, we have been minded to take action. I did hint at the end of my piece about the further action we might take. Conor has set out the steps before ad publication and after publication that advertisers really should be taking to ensure that they're complying with the rule. Now, there's a question about whether those steps should be mandatory in and of themselves. Should we compel advertisers of gambling and alcohol products to put in place those restrictions? And in the event that they haven't put in those pre and post publication work, would it be appropriate for the ASA system to name and shame those advertisers? That's a question that we're actively asking ourselves, and of course we're always trying to get a proportionate response to it. So look out for more detail on that in 2022.
I would also, just to follow on from that, say that the instances that are identified by the avatar monitoring are not necessarily reflective of real world exposures. There's a huge range of factors that go into who receives ads when and where, and we were simply looking at profiles that mimic the profile of a certain age group, but not even necessarily the behavior of that age group. So we can't always transpose those into real world examples. But to sort of follow on from that, from another Q&A done it from Douglas as well, we haven't made a lot of information available about the future monitoring studies that we're doing on age restricted products, but essentially it is that we're looking at ways in which we could capture and analyze real world ad exposures of actual under 18 users. There'll be more information on that coming out in the new year after the research has been conducted, but essentially it is trying to capture safely and appropriately information on real ad exposures to under 18s.
Brilliant, great. Thank you, Shahriar and Conor. Any other questions at all? Feel free to pop them into the Q&A box.
Robnita, I can say a little bit in response to Douglas's question about plans for future ASA monitoring of age-restricted products and social media. I'll probably just restrict it to two incidences, if I may. So the first is, Conor talked about the alcohol and social media report, which identified various targeting practices of alcohol manufacturers in social media sites. And we were concerned that some of those practices may not sufficiently exclude children who have incorrectly registered as being 18 plus or are falsely inferred to be 18 plus. So what we saw was some really good practice in terms of targeting and some not such good practice. What that report didn't identify, however, is whether actually children are in receipt of those ads. So our next step is to undertake a really large piece of work with a nationally representative group of school children, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, to identify whether actually alcohol and gambling ads are actually being delivered to their accounts, and where they are being delivered, to run an audit with the advertiser to understand how they got there. That will obviously take into account that some children, as we know, are registered with false date of births and others not. So that will be an interesting follow-up to it. And the other thing I'll say is a much more general piece is that the ASA has now a new data science capability. So we are actively exploring the extent to which pooling of data, use of machine learning will be able to automate much of the work that we've done to date and provide a much more kind of ready flow of monitoring to the extent that is feasible. So there's two areas in which we will seek to extend our work.
Brilliant, thanks, Shahriar. We've had another question come in, which I think will probably be our last one for today, but someone has asked, what are the views of the ASA on YouTube videos used for advertising purposes? We understand that YouTube videos posted on the operator's own channel need to be age-gated. However, YouTube have confirmed that age-gated videos are not able to be used for advertising purposes. If such videos are adequately targeted at a 25 plus audience, as well as reasonable endeavours are taken to ensure self-excluded and internally marked high-risk players are excluded from the target, is this considered to be acceptable by the ASA?
That's a very specific question, and I'm not sure I have the answer to it. It's so much of that question I do see that it's videos used for advertising purposes. Okay, so there's a question mark there about whether they are appropriately disclosed as advertising. Of course, if an advertiser is paying for the contents, they should be marked as advertising, and where that payment also includes control by the advertiser, that would fall under the ASA's remit, and the ASA could do something about that in the event that they weren't properly disclosed. I have a thought that actually this might relate to placement of ads, so kind of sponsorship or product placements. And that's a really kind of tricky area because the ASA doesn't get involved in product placement or sponsorship areas. Obviously for TV, there's Ofcom that deals with those matters, and a range of different bodies might have an interest in sponsorship and product placement in relation to YouTube video ads, but not the ASA, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, not an optimal answer because I'm not quite sure of exactly what the question is getting at, but there's some thoughts.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to get across in the text there and in the time that we've got, but it does sound like this is more related to a restriction that YouTube places, saying that if your video is age gated, it cannot be used for targeted ads. And I suppose we don't have a direct line to YouTube on what their policies are in this regard, and it may be that they have a blanket policy related to certain that is only really intended for certain types of age gated content, extreme content rather than just because it contains an age restricted product. But we're probably not best placed to comment on it because it does sound like it's more related to a potential what the questioner sees as a potential inconsistency in a YouTube policy rather than an actual decision on whether or not something would breach our codes.
Perfect, thanks. Thank you, Conor and Shahriar. It looks like we have come to the end of the time that we have allocated for today's webinar. We do hope you found the session useful, and hopefully we've managed to answer everyone's questions as well. Do keep an eye out for an email that I'll be sending out tomorrow morning with a link to the recording and links to all of the guidance that we have discussed today so that you have that all to hand. But a big thank you to Conor and Shahriar for leading on today's webinar, and thank you all for attending as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Since this webinar was conducted, we've been working on updating our key guidance document on online targeting. In November 2022, we published a revised version of the advertising guidance on age-restricted ads online. You can read the guidance in full by visiting asa.org.uk/online-targeting. The guidance shows it is possible for advertisers of age-restricted products to target their online ads responsibly, provided they make appropriate use of the available tools. However, these tools vary from platform to platform, so there's no one-size-fits-all approach to responsible targeting. You should make sure you've considered all the options available to you before running ads for age-restricted products. That way you can minimise the likelihood that children and young people will see your ads. As you can see from the infographic, the guidance covers the major areas you should focus on to ensure responsible targeting, such as choosing suitable online media, ensuring appropriate use of age, interest and behavioural targeting tools, best practice when working with influencers, content creators and other social media partners, ensuring your own social media posts reach the appropriate audience, and of course monitoring your campaigns to check they're not being seen by inappropriate audiences, and then using that information to amend your future advertising approaches. The new guidance replaces the version we published in early 2021. It was developed with expert research support and collaboration from industry representatives, ad tech providers, and trade bodies for age-restricted products. The principles-based guidance will be relevant to advertisers of all sizes. It covers paid ads in open online environments, paid ads on social media platforms, social media campaigns on your own account, and those you make in partnership with content creators. For the first time, we also address how you should work with agencies, ad tech partners, and content creators to ensure everyone involved in your campaigns is doing all they can to prevent children and young people from seeing age-restricted ads. The guidance is applicable to all age-restricted products, including alcohol, gambling, food and drink high in fats, salts or sugars, sometimes referred to as HFSS, and cosmetic interventions. It will also be useful to anyone running ads with content that may be unsuitable for children. As we mentioned in the original webinar, in addition to producing new guidance, we've also been conducting more monitoring and research projects on children's exposure to ads online. The 100 Children project looked at real-world examples of children seeing ads for age-restricted products on their own mobile devices. You can find out the latest information about that research on the ASA and CAP website.